Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 5th of December, a federal holiday to remember President Bush. As always, we encourage you to remain aware of what's going on with your Alaska weather. 1-800-472-0391. Weather.gov/Alaska is the easy way to find that online. And of course, if you can't find what you're looking for, I'm always happy to help you. Just email me at david.snider@noaa.gov. Let's get right to it. Awful lot going along in northern and western Alaska. You can see a lot of yellow on the map. We're also going to include the eastern Alaska range here for a wind advisory that we could see gusts up to 60 miles per hour until probably tomorrow morning. So the eastern Alaska range is still fairly windy in the region. Out west and up north, you're looking at winter weather advisories for all of the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range out toward Ambler in the upper Koyukuk Valley, the upper Noatak and Kobuk Valleys down through Galena and into southwestern Alaska. We are expecting to see at least a little bit of freezing rain, but primarily it's going to be snow and blowing snow that'll be your main concerns through at least tonight and really a good part of your Thursday across the western regions. Now, there are some areas out west that have red on the map. That'll be St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait coast there, all the way from Wales down toward Tin City, just about to Nome. In these regions, we're going to have more wind. We're going to have a better chance for some snow and accumulating snow at that. And the winds are going to stay with you for a lot longer. In fact, low pressure is organizing right here around the Bering Strait, and it's going to hover in this region for at least the next 2 days and strengthen as we get into tonight and tomorrow, substantially so. One of the things that happens is that as low pressure systems organize, they draw in colder northerly winds. And when they have a really good source of cold air, they can get a lot stronger a lot faster. And in this case, this is one of those situations where low pressure is going to grab in a whole lot of cold Siberian air and really deepen very quickly. So we're going to see rapid intensification of low pressure right here around St. Lawrence Island. So if you are in Gamble or Savunga or around the Bering Strait coast, the western end of the Seward Peninsula especially, maybe even Nome, you're going to want to keep close watch on the weather for the next 2 to 3 days here. And that sounds like a long time for a winter storm. It is. It's not going to move very much. What you should expect tonight should be high surf. High surf advisory is posted for your area because of those northeast winds blowing up to about 40 miles per hour. As we get into tomorrow, those winds are going to become a little more northerly and increase to about 70 miles per hour. So some stronger gusts there, not sustained winds, but stronger gusts from 40 increasing to 70 miles per hour. So that's going to mean a lot of cold air pouring into your region, and with precipitation in the area, it's going to be snow. About 3 to 6 inches of snow is possible in general around St. Lawrence Island and the western end of Seward Peninsula, but you might see as much as 10. With the winds howling and the snow blowing, there's a decent chance that we're going to get really close to blizzard conditions. So if I were you, I would plan for blizzard conditions and hope that they don't reach that. But it looks like for the next 2 days or so, this area that we've got painted in red is going to be substantially impacted by a very intense winter storm, and that could reach into blizzard category. So stay tuned for more weather information. Make sure you're listening to our friends there at the Fairbanks National Weather Service because they're watching your weather very carefully, and they're going to let you know if it's going to be worse than what we're talking about right now, and there is that chance. So pay attention there especially. Now for areas in the interior of the Seward Peninsula, the northern and Chukchi coast, you're looking at about 1 to 4 inches of snow. Chances are it won't be as windy as what we're talking about a little bit further to the west. Norton Sound communities there all the way up into the Koyukuk Valley and the lower Yukon and into the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. It's primarily going to be light amounts of snow and maybe a little bit of wind. And remember our wind advisory again for the eastern Alaska range. The intense weather is going to be out here, and it's going to stick around for a while. Let's take a look at what it looks like on the satellite picture this afternoon. You can see we have a deep southerly flow. It's really taking over most of the Gulf, and it hasn't really pushed a lot of moisture or wind into southeast just yet. That will probably change as we get into late Friday and into Saturday. For now, the focus is on low pressure that you can kind of see organizing right around in here. You see this curl that's shaping up? That's going to help breed another area of low pressure here across the Bering Strait as we get into Thursday and Thursday night. So a lot of changes are going to happen pretty quick there. We're also getting a new wave coming in across the western Bering Sea. That's going to run into an area of high pressure and kind of slow down. So not really a huge factor. The big factor is the cold air that we can't even see on the map that will be drawn into this region as we get into your Thursday afternoon and Thursday night. So to set the stage, again, we have a broad southerly flow across the Gulf, high pressure across the Yukon, and already several waves working north and west across northwestern Alaska. And remember that tight pressure gradient packing that we like to talk about, or the lines getting a lot closer together. It means the winds are already moving fairly quickly across the region, and that north and northeast wind already blowing through St. Lawrence Island, setting the stage there with areas of blowing snow in the region. We've got snow across the Yukon Delta, across the southern Brooks Range, and across the Chukchi Coast, but the winds will be the strongest again through the Bering Strait. As we go into tonight, here goes the first area of low pressure, 991 millibars. Already the wind's starting to tighten up there across the Bering Strait. Snow will be falling across a large part of the Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound, down toward the Yukon Delta. We'll have snow up across the western parts of the Alaska Range, and rain's expected around Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, and the north and eastern Gulf. It's starting to stretch back into areas just outside of Sitka. The northern areas are probably looking at snow for Chilkoot and White Pass. As we get into Thursday, low pressure is deepening to 984 millibars. The north and western side is where we're going to see that really intense wind, and you'll see that hovering very close to, if not just east of St. Lawrence Island. That means all of St. Lawrence Island is going to be on that northerly wind. Now, because this is a rapidly changing system and an intensifying system, the outlook for the weather will likely change. So when you get going tomorrow, make sure you check the weather, because things will likely be adjusted just a little bit. Around the Seward Peninsula region, the Chukchi Coast, will continue to see snow and wind throughout the day. Winter storm warning will be in effect for your area. And most of the interior will be looking at winter weather advisories generally north and west of the Yukon. As you look further south, the cold front is dropping southward into the southern Bering Sea, and that means the winds will gradually shift for the central and western chain. Low pressure sitting just south of Kodiak Island at 985 millibars. That's going to draw another southerly surge up into the northern Gulf. That means more rain for Prince William Sound, the Kenai Peninsula, the Barren Islands, all the way up into the Alaska Range. But it looks like with this flow, a large part of south central along the Cook Inlet up into the Susitna Valley will generally be kind of rain shadowed a little bit. The mountains will kind of hold back some of that precipitation. So we get into Friday, low pressure is deepening here across the central Gulf, and this is when southeast starts to pay attention to the weather. You can notice your pressure gradient starting to pack in here across the region, and the winds will intensify. A storm force low looks to be forming here, so as we get into Friday and Friday night, interests along the outer coast of southeast really need to start paying attention to this one. And we'll probably see the winds come up sharply across the inside passage as well. So our friends at the Weather Service in Juneau are going to be sending you some new messages as we go through the next couple days. Make sure you're following them on Twitter and checking their regular old Weather Service site. Weather.gov/Juneau is a great place to start. And of course, finding them on Facebook. The winds are going to tighten up across the northern Gulf as well, so this is going to have some wind impacts for parts of Prince William Sound and the Kenai Peninsula, but you'll notice again, we left a lot of precipitation out along northern Cook Inlet into Anchorage, and also the southern end of the Parks Highway in the Susitna Valley. So a lot of this area may not see a lot of precipitation, but it will be focused in areas in southwest. And our low pressure system still spinning around here in the Bering Strait region, 979 millibars now, not that far away from St. Lawrence Island, and still keeping that northerly intense flow working through the island. So like I said earlier, a winter storm warning's in effect right now, but plan for blizzard conditions there and hope it doesn't reach that, because it does look like an intense period of snow and wind will be working through the Bering Strait for Gamble and Savunga, and Diomede for that matter as well. It's certainly the western end of the Seward Peninsula as we go into Friday, with snow continuing along the Brooks Range and periods of blowing snow for many in the upper Koyukuk Valley and Kobuk and Noatak valleys as we go through the end of the week. A lot going on there, so be careful, be safe. Here's a look at your weather for tomorrow morning. Temps will be in the single digits, if not below that, for the North Slope. Teens and 20s for many in the Koyukuk Valley, down toward the Yukon and Kuskokwim valleys. Near 40 in Kodiak, upper 30s for most of the Alaska Peninsula, mid to upper 30s for southeast, south central in the 20s and 30s, Prince William Sound, let's say Cordova and Valdez in the mid-30s. As we get into the afternoon tomorrow, we're looking at temps that don't make it to zero for Utqiagvik, 8 in Kaktovik, anywhere from the single digits to the teens to Point Hope and Point Lay. 20s for most of Kotzebue Sound, upper 20s to about 30 for Norton Sound, above freezing for most in Bristol Bay, 43 in Kodiak, low 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and Sandpoint, south central close to freezing, southeast upper 30s to 40 degrees.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to aviation weather now, IFR conditions are expected across most areas west of the Alaska Range into about the Kuskokwim Valley, and then from the Yukon Delta northward into the Bering Strait, over St. Lawrence Island and just west of Nunivak Island, and also across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range into about areas around Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, and then westward along the north-facing slopes there just south of Utqiagvik. North of southeast, central southeast especially, you're going to see a little bit more of an increasing area of MVFR into the Copper River Valley where that becomes IFR. And then the next wave moving across the Bering is going to bring IFR with that. A little bit of high pressure trying to break up some of the really dense low clouds and ceiling there. You'll notice IFR thick across the Norton Sound region, St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait all the way down through Eetolen Strait and south of the Pribilofs, across the western Alaska Range and west of Kodiak Island and AKwx, and then northward, fairly widespread MVFR across the upper Koyukuk Valley and eastward all the way across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. By Friday, some of that's improving. You'll notice fairly widespread MVFR across the North Slope, along all of the Yukon Valley, the Delta, and down into the Kuskokwim Delta. IFR is fairly widespread across the Gulf, most of the Kenai Fjords area in Prince William Sound, and also in southern parts of Cook Inlet, though the Susitna Valley and all the way up toward Tanita Pass, probably looking at maybe more marginal conditions. Across the outer coast, marginal conditions there. The inside passage, by and large, looks to be VFR, and then most of the Bering Sea also holding it MVFR. By the afternoon on Friday, look for a widespread IFR across the Bering Strait region, south-facing coast of the Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound, and all the way up to Yukon Valley. South of that, into the Middle Tanana Valley, you're going to start seeing a lot more MVFR, maybe even some improvements toward VFR. And then south of that, save for the Parks Highway Corridor and down towards Soldotna and Kenai, you're looking at generally IFR conditions across south central and into parts of the northern Gulf Coast. Southeast, though, fares well with VFR conditions for just about all of the peninsula on Friday afternoon. Here's a look at your past conditions now. For your Thursday, we're going to start out with IFR. Some improvements should be seen there as the day goes on, expecting MVFR there, and for Adigan Pass as we get into your afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass are expected to hold at IFR throughout the day. Randy Pass may see some marginal improvements by the afternoon. Do look for a VFR start in Windy Pass, but look for MVFR by the afternoon. Isabel Pass, we're expecting VFR really most of the day and should see a little bit of a changeover there from Antasta Pass, expecting a marginal start and maybe an IFR finish by the afternoon, so keep that in mind. That's a little bit different than what we normally see there. And Tanita Pass, we're also expecting visual flight rule through most of the day. Portage looks pretty good for your Thursday, and Chilkoot and White Pass we expect to hold at a marginal level most of your Thursday afternoon. For Thursday morning, we expect to see the surface freezing line just north of Nunivak Island all the way out to areas south of St. Matthew and north of St. Paul. Notice the 2,000-foot freezing line there. Boy, it's all over the place there for the Alaska Peninsula and out toward the Aleutian Chain. And you can see it hovering over the inside passage of southeastern Alaska, too, taking a little bit of a jog south of Prince William Sound and the Kenai. 4,000-foot lines, they're just a little bit out to sea, but that puts most of southeast between 2,000 and about 4,000 feet for your Thursday morning, with the bulk of the interior, of course, at or even below freezing. Icing potential is generally in the eastern half or even eastern two-thirds of Alaska for your Thursday. Isolated moderate should be expected across the Brooks Range, eastward into the Yukon, most of the Alaska Range, most of the middle and eastern interior, most of the Gulf, and let's say about the northern half of southeast, generally above 7,000 feet there, above 4,000 feet in the north and the west. Watch for that to pick up again from the west as the next system moves in. And it's doing that because we have a very healthy north and westerly flow coming across the Bering and the North Pacific. Wind speeds there anywhere from 100 to 170 knots. That is super fast. Southerly flow coming in from a very deep spot in the Pacific there. With that, we're getting 90 to 110 knots coming out of the south. That's got warmth, that's got moisture, and that's pushing that very far north into the Arctic. The 9,000 level winds, you can see a south and easterly flow across the Gulf. Winds are generally a little lighter across southeast. The interior is seeing a convergence area here between 15 and 25 knots from the west and southwest, and northerlies coming through the Bering Strait and focusing on low pressure just south of the Aleutian Chain. At 3,000 feet, that southeasterly flow is a little stronger across across the outer coast. Wind speeds there up to 55 knots south of Sitka. Southerlies are lighter across the interior, around 10 knots, and we've got that northerly push coming in across the North Slope, but just barely making it so. Northeasterlies through the Bering Strait and most of the Bering Sea, 15 to as strong as 40 knots there. So we're going to watch for turbulence mainly around the Bering Strait below 4,000 feet. On the western side, you could see some isolated severe. Below 8,000 feet, considerable moderate in the northern Gulf. Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service, and joining us today, two more people to talk about the augmented reality sandbox. It's Alana Valaji. She's a University of Alaska Fairbanks mechanical engineering student, helped design and work on the details to make this new type of sandbox there. Thanks for joining us, Alana. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator for AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. It's a program funded nationally by the National Science Foundation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Alana, tell us about how you changed and adapted this version of the augmented reality sandbox. It's a really cool tool.
So Gina approached us with 3 goals for this new version of the sandbox. They wanted it to be compact in a light system that could travel around the state. They wanted it to be child-oriented, so we designed the sandbox to have 3 different levels.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. You can have younger children, you can have high school kids. I guess I should say high school teenagers.
Sure.
And then we also designed it to be more marketable, user-friendly, so that this could be seen eventually in classrooms all over the place, all over the state.
Okay. And you had a big hand in this, but this was a team approach, right?
Definitely. It was a really good experience for myself, for George Stevens, who we'll see later.
One of our hand models today. Yeah.
For 2 other members who aren't here today, Cody Klingman and Austin Hunt. And it was just a really good learning experience all around.
Very good. And this is something that is part of your learning experience as well, so you get to check a box in your education.
Yeah,
right?
it's a requirement for seniors of mechanical engineering at University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Very good. Very good. Well, it is a wonderfully inquisitive tool, fun to play with, and I hope to get my hands in the sand here in just a little bit. But it's also part of a bigger program, something that we were talking about a moment ago, AKwx, and that's what Courtney is here to tell us more about. What is AKwx and why do you need a sandbox?
Well, AKwx, as you mentioned, is a national program. We're funded nationally, but we're actually located statewide. We're at UAF, we're at UAA, we're in Southeast at UAS. And she mentioned, you know, taking the sandbox as an educational tool, and that's where I'm an outreach coordinator for the South Central test case.
Okay.
Our focus is on the Kenai watershed, and we are really interested in using these tools like the sandbox to interact with the students down there and get them interested in STEM and also communicate the research findings that we've been having throughout the state.
Okay. And one of those, as George and Eric are kind of changing the contours for us there from UAF to maybe something that resembles a little bit of something more of the Kenai watershed, which is one of your focuses for the study, right? And specifically looking at some of the changes there and how that impacts people and also the salmon.
Yes, it is all of our research is social and environmental.
Okay.
So we have social scientists working hand in hand with our environmental scientists. One of the things we're studying is Upper Russian Lake, and we have a researcher taking sediment cores from that lake. So one of the things we're going to use the sandbox to communicate is how the landscape changed over a long period of time, thousands of years, going from glacier, covered by glacier ice, to being filled with water. And then
that's what they're doing right now.
Exactly. So
live.
So they're moving
cool.
the water around. And then I think they've got some props over there, because we're also going to go a little bit more in depth and explain how the salmon got there.
Okay.
So using
there's
these,
the salmon.
Exactly. Oh, I think there's a few more.
Yeah, we like more salmon in Alaska. More salmon.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really taking the findings from our research grant and just trying to connect with the community and translate it in a really hands-on and exciting way, so people can, you know, interact with us as much as possible.
Well, sure. That makes the learning and the science real and quite literally in your face, rather than just some boring black and white paper that you have to read about. This is something that people can understand better because it's visual and they're touching and feeling and seeing these changes, right?
Yeah, and get them engaged. And then outreach is a huge component, and working with the younger students, and actually even, I mean, working with the UAF graduate and engineering students it's a huge part of our grant, and we really enjoy it.
Oh, it is wonderfully exciting. And so, Alana, you were telling us that this is built to travel.
Right.
And this is built to do more things than version 1. Where can this type of project go in Alaska? And what can it demonstrate?
I mean, we were hoping to eventually get to villages that were harder to reach, that you couldn't necessarily move a whole fixed instrument to, right? You need something that can pack up, fit in your truck bed. I mean, one of the most attractive parts of this project is that this was going to be something that was used past our graduation point. You know, this is going to be something that lives in the state for years.
Right, right. Well, it looks like you're well on your way with that. So what are, give me another example. What else can this show us? We've talked about the Kenai River watershed. What's the coolest thing that you've played in the sand with? What's your idea?
Well, I definitely enjoy the props, but we also like kind of building up a giant mound, and if you put some water behind it, you can make a little runway, I guess, and you know, demonstrate the effects of the hydrology by just putting up a dam and letting it all pour right down. And so that could, I think you mentioned it earlier, you could even demonstrate the effects of a tsunami.
Right.
Or something along those lines.
So it's not just topography, but it's also hydrology and coastal surge mapping and some of the coastal changes that we're seeing here in Alaska, and seeing what the smaller changes in the sandbox might do to kind of a real effect of a slosh or a push of water up on the coast. Tsunami inundation mapping, or even glacial dam release, as some has been demonstrated before. So wow, that's just an impressive thing. That it seems like the possibilities are nearly endless with this, and probably even more ideas that are popping up in your head too.
Yeah, as we speak.
Very cool. All right. Well, if folks want to get more information about AKwx, you guys are online. You're on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. AKwx, right? AKwx, Alaska AKwx, that is. And again, you guys are funded by the National Science Foundation, so more to come from that, and a longer-term study there. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Congratulations on your hard work there. This is really fun. And for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and I'm going to go play in the sandbox there. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
On to a look at your sea ice edge now. No big changes in the Beaufort, but you can see the Chukchi sea ice is rapidly filling in across the basin. That's been previously sea ice, open, let's say, not sea ice free yet. You'll notice too that northwesterly winds continue to push the pack down toward the Bering Strait. So within a matter of days to weeks, we're going to see some significant changes there for the Bering Strait. Kotzebue Sound continues to fill in. We got a little bit of marginal ice in the upper end there, and the same goes for the middle to upper end of the Norton Sound region, just south of Nome. Still looking at some open water all the way out towards St. Lawrence Island, and again all the way down the YK coastline, looking for continued changes there. As we go into next week, there's a pretty good opportunity for a lot of cold air to spill into the Bering, so there could be some pretty significant changes there as it relates to sea ice if the wind settles down. That's a big factor, of course, going forward. Let's take a look at Thursday's marine forecast now. In southeast, gusts to 35 knots there across northern Lynn Canal, 20 knots in 4-foot seas. Southeasterlies 10 to 15 across the rest of the inside passage. And you'll look for a similar wind direction for the outer coast, but winds will be stronger there, 20 to as strong as 30 knots outside of Yakutat, with a 15-foot sea, 12-foot seas outside of the Dixon entrance. For Friday, remember that gales and possibly storms forming there by Friday night, so we're looking at some pretty strong winds developing sharp changes there as we get into Friday afternoon. South and southeasterlies 45 to 50 knots with seas 20 to 25. On the inside, kind of a different story. You'll notice gusty winds developing around Stevens Passage and probably Clarence Strait, but northeasterlies in Lynn Canal at 10 knots, only bringing us 2-foot seas there on Friday. So watch for changes Friday night for sure. Thursday, look for light winds from the south and east for Prince William Sound and northern Cook Inlet. A little bit of a stronger east and northeasterly flow for southern Cook Inlet, the Barrens, and the northern Gulf. 9 to 11-foot seas there, and 5 to 9-foot seas outside of Kachemak Bay. 25 knots around the western Barrens with a 9-foot sea. For Friday, some of those stronger winds making their way into the northern Gulf waters and outside of Prince William Sound. Gales up to 50 knots with 24-foot seas on a southeast wind. Easterlies also going strong at 45 knots with a 10-foot sea. East and southeasterlies coming into the northern Gulf and outside of the Barrens, 30 to 45. Northern Cook Inlet, still looking at northeasterlies, 30 knots with an 8-foot sea, and stronger winds as you head into the western Barrens, 35 knots with a 12-foot sea. For Bristol Bay and really most of the Bering Sea coast, things look pretty good. 10 knots with a 2-foot sea in both areas. As you get into the Kodiak Island area, 20 to 25 knots with 5-foot seas in Shelikof and 11-foot seas east of Kodiak Island. Northerly winds down the coast. As you get into Friday, a north and westerly wind starts to sweep in. The stronger winds are still going to hold out to the west, it looks like, but some of that will work its way over the Kodiak Island and into the Alaska Peninsula, around 20 to 25 knots. 4-foot seas inside of Shelikof with 8 to 13-foot seas across the Pacific coast and 8 to 12-foot seas down the Bering Sea coast and inside of Bristol Bay. For the Aleutians, central and eastern chain winds will generally hold from the north and northwest. You're looking at about 10 to 30 knots, 9 to 15-foot seas along the Pacific coast. But notice that next wave is already moving in across the west. Kiska and Attu should see 40-knot winds with a 20 to 22-foot sea on Thursday. By Friday, that diminishes somewhat as the bulk of the wind shifts eastward to the central and eastern chain. Even so, we're still looking at 25-knot winds from the north and west and seas holding 11 to 13 feet with about 13 to 18-foot seas across the Pacific coast and around 16 to 17-foot seas there for the west. For the west coast, some sharp winds are blowing in across St. Lawrence Island, 45 knots with a 16-foot sea. Remember, a winter storm warning is in effect there as well as a high surf advisory. Easterlies blowing through Norton Sound, north and northwesterlies for the Pribilofs, down to the Kuskokwim Delta where we still hold on to a southeast wind at 15 with a 4-foot sea. By Friday, north and westerly winds are blowing for everyone there. Northeasterlies inside of Norton Sound, 30 to 40 knots north of Nunivak Island towards St. Lawrence Island with 17-foot seas in the region, 14 to 17-foot seas for St. Matthew, St. Paul, and St. George on a 30-knot wind for Friday and growing colder. For the north slope, north and easterly winds for the Beaufort, northeasterlies much stronger down the Chukchi, and northerlies through the Bering Strait, 45 knots with a 16-foot sea by Friday. A little bit of reprieve, 35 to 40-knot winds there, seas still holding around 12 to 17 foot, and westerlies 15 to 20 across the Beaufort seacoast. Once again, a strong storm is organizing around the Bering Strait, and we're going to see this deepen over the next couple days and hover in similar position. A winter storm warning is in effect for St. Lawrence Island and the western end of the Seward Peninsula. We also expect to see winter weather advisories for most of the northern and western interior, where there could be a little bit of freezing rain, but your main issues will be snow and blowing snow. Watch for the storm across the central and eastern Gulf to intensify rapidly Friday night as well, bringing storm force winds to the outer coast and parts of the northern Gulf with high seas that could take us well into the weekend. Be safe, my friends. We'll check in with you again right here on Alaska Weather tomorrow. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.